JEM Publishing presents the unabridged recording of Rescuing Melissa, The Guardian Hostage Rescue Specialists, Book 1, written by Ellie Masters, narrated by Aubrey Vincent and Matt Haynes. 11. Yellow Tulips. Melissa. Hospitals smelled wrong. They were too clean, or perhaps not clean enough. A pervasive odor of sickness hung in the air, something even the best disinfectant couldn't hide. The staff was obnoxiously loud. Their conversations all day and night kept Melissa painfully awake. And the lights! She couldn't wait to get away from the harsh fluorescence. She'd barely slept in the past 2 days, and what sleep she caught had been filled with pain. Hospitals were the worst place to be if you wanted to get well, and she couldn't wait to be discharged. She shifted in her bed. Everywhere ached. Even her hair hurt. After 2 days on the soft mattress, her back screamed to be in its comfortable bed at home. The bruising over her left side was spectacular. Every time she moved, her body begged for her to stop. 3 tiny bandages marked her belly, and a rainbow of bruises marred her side. But she moved as much as she was able. Her ticket home depended on getting up. She'd undergone emergency laparoscopic surgery. The procedure was supposed to have been less painful than cutting her open with a knife. 3 small holes had been punched in her belly, one for a camera and the others for surgical ports. The surgeons inserted tools through the ports that controlled tiny knives, scissors, and other things she didn't understand. Her healing was supposed to take far less time than if they'd opened her up. Still hurt like hell. Pain medication took the edge off the worst of it, but the pills made her foggy. To make things worse, all the air they'd injected into her belly had her looking 5 months pregnant. She'd been assured her body would return to normal. In the meantime, she ran her fingers over the 3 tiny bandages, which also made her skin itch. Every color of the rainbow represented itself over her left side, from deep purple and blue to a softening yellow, orange, and even sickly greens. From hip to shoulder, the bruising reminded her how close she'd come to death. Her thoughts turned to CJ and his smile. Her chivalrous knight, with his chiseled jaw, thicker than thick biceps and sculpted chest, had the softest eyes and the biggest heart she'd ever run across. His sky-blue eyes had twinkled with mischief when she'd caught him peeking at the lace of her bra. But he hadn't made her feel self-conscious. She'd been vulnerable, and he'd made her feel safe. She shouldn't think about him, but couldn't stop doing just that. He'd blown in and out of her life with the same speed and devastation as that tornado. Wreckage remained in his wake because he'd stirred up an aching loneliness she'd suppressed since Scott's arrest. In the 3 years since her ex-husband had been taken away, she'd not once thought about the possibility of another man. CJ's interest, as small as it had been, had her hopeful. His touch stirred something deep inside, something she hoped to explore, but she was realistic. He'd been nothing more than a fantasy. Her fitful dreams had been filled with the real-life Superman that was CJ. The funny thing was her life had needed saving, but not from a tornado. She'd wanted to thank CJ, but the nursing staff had no information about the man who'd dropped her off in the emergency room. Her hero had become a ghost. But it was time for new beginnings. Scott was gone. She had a new life stretching ahead. It was time to heal. In body, mind, and soul, Melissa vowed to take back her life. Her nurse breezed into her hospital room, followed by a delivery man carrying flowers.
"Got something for you, Miss Evans?"
Charles comforted Melissa. His massive size, rather than intimidating, conjured images of a squishy teddy bear. Everything he did made her feel better. It was in the tiny things, like the way he fluffed her pillow, held the straw so she could sip her water, and even in how he maintained her dignity while exposing her body to care for her wounds. He soothed her fears about needles when he had to stick her arm, distracting her with jokes and silly songs.
"Special delivery."
The delivery man held out a bouquet of tulips with an expectant expression. Nearly as tall as Charles, The man had the lean build of an athlete, like a runner or a cyclist. Her heart missed a beat, and she stifled a gasp. That message was one she knew all too well. But there was something new nestled within the blooms. A flash of crimson drew her attention to the single blood-red rose gracing the yellow tulips. Her stomach heaved, and she grasped the bed rails as blood pounded in her veins. This couldn't be happening. The florist reached into the flowers and pulled out the red rose. He brought it to his nose, inhaled, and then presented it with another grand gesture. There was a raw beauty about his features, and something disturbing about the intensity of his gaze. Rimless glasses framed a long, narrow face. His gaze shifted between the rose and her hand, a brittleness out of sync with the friendly gesture. She reached out, hand trembling, and took the rose. Who did these come from? She knew the answer, but had to hear the truth. Her voice quivered, showing a weakness she thought long buried. She hadn't seen the execution. Scott had demanded her presence, but she'd refused. Her lawyer was to let her know of Scott's death, but in the confusion of the storm and her hospitalization, her lawyer didn't know where she was, and she'd lost her phone. She placed the rose on her lap without smelling it, and hid the tremors shaking her hands. She had nothing to give the delivery man for a tip, and hoped he'd take the hint and leave. He gave a curious look, a frown framed with irritation. Charles moved around the room, methodical while he worked. He hummed a tune while he strung new fluids in the IV pumps beside her bed, a full bag of clear liquid to replace the one which had emptied into her veins. Charles paused.
Beautiful arrangement. Are tulips your favorite?
Memories she'd tried to forget surfaced with a wave of anguish, bringing with them a clamminess she couldn't ignore. Dizziness caused her to clutch at the side rails of her bed. If she hadn't been confined to the bed, she might have collapsed. How had Scott sent flowers? Was it some sadistic torture he planned in the days leading to his execution? Charles plucked the card out of the flowers. He handed her the envelope.
Maybe it's from your hero? Hero?
The delivery man's brows scrunched up.
What do you mean, hero?
Disapproval hung heavy in the man's voice. Why was the delivery man lingering?
Miss Evans was saved from a tornado,
Charles said. CJ had pretended to be her husband when he dropped her off in the emergency department. He did it to stay close while they completed her initial assessment. Only after her surgery did she admit the truth to the staff. The hospital still had her listed as a Jane Doe, something she'd been told would be straightened out at discharge when she paid her bill. She shared her story with Charles and may have gushed over CJ with the narcotics floating in her veins. She tried to steady her hand and clutched the envelope to her chest. Memories of Scott surged with each constricted breath. Was it possible he hadn't died? Knowing how calculating he was, he'd probably arranged for the delivery before his death. A "fuck you, you're still mine" gesture. He'd given her 3 yellow tulips on their first anniversary. 3 tulips, he said, one for his undying love, the second for his smoldering passion, and the third for his everlasting loyalty. The following year she received 6, 9 the year after, and then 12, 15, and then 18 in that horrible last year when everything had fallen apart. 3 tulips for each year of marriage. The flowers had been a symbol not of love, passion, and loyalty, but something much worse. They'd been stolen lives. But in those 6 years, not once had he given her a rose. The flowers had always been yellow tulips, his favorite, not hers, and always multiples of 3. She hadn't understood the significance behind the tulips, at least not until the trial. But when the prosecutors pulled out the princess outfits, her world, as imperfect as it had been, imploded with horror. She'd been the first to wear the princess outfits, but hadn't been the last. That story became a thing fit for the tabloids and shared in national news. Love, passion, loyalty. Might as well have been pain, torture, and death. She used to joke with him that if he continued adding 3 every year, he'd have to buy an entire delivery truck at their 50th anniversary. 150 tulips. The tabloids had made connections where there had been none. She'd been as much of a victim as those poor women, but the tabloids vilified her, intimating she had been his accomplice. Twisting the truth brought more sales, and they painted her in the worst light. While they made millions, Melissa struggled to breathe and make it to the end of the day. Scott had made her into the perfect fool. After Scott's conviction, the deliveries stopped. She hadn't seen a yellow tulip since, and couldn't look at the delicate flower without her stomach heaving. "I'm going to be sick." Weak from her injuries, she could barely lean over the side of the bed. Charles scooped up a trash can and placed it under her mouth moments before she emptied the contents of her stomach. Wonderful man that he was, he held her hair out of the way. The delivery man inched back to the doorway. If he was expecting a tip, he would have to wait a long time.
Since when have you been feeling nauseous?
Charles felt her forehead and then checked her pulse. "I haven't." It was the tulips, but she didn't want to explain the reaction. The single red rose fell to the floor. How had Scott orchestrated this delivery? And how had he known to deliver it here? No one knew she had been hospitalized.
I'm getting the doctor.
Charles pressed the call bell located over her bed. In a few seconds, another nurse popped her head into the room. "Need help?"
Call Dr. Sims.
"I'll be fine," Melissa protested with a wave of her hand. "It's nothing."
Nothing my behind.
Charles used his smile to comfort her, but her insides twisted. "Can you please take the flowers out of the room?" Charles cocked his head.
Just lay back, try to relax while we check this out.
She gestured to her belly, drawing a circle over the bandages beneath her hospital gown. "Spleen's all good. Nothing else wrong. I'm supposed to be getting out of here." Even to her ears, she sounded like a petulant child.
You're not fine. Dr. Sims will make sure everything's okay.
She counted the flowers. 18 tulips. 18 lives snuffed out of existence. Scott should be suffering as the devil welcomed him to his eternal resting place in hell. Her eyes cut to the florist when he picked up the rose and tried to hand it to her. "I don't want the flowers." Charles cocked his head.
You sure?
"I'm hypersensitive to their smell." Charles's forehead creased.
I smell nothing.
"Please, just make them go away. I don't want them." Charles handed the bouquet back to the delivery man and ushered him out of the room. Dr. Sims walked in.
What's wrong?
He pulled his stethoscope out of his white coat pocket. "Nothing." Charles returned.
She's nauseous, vomited, her vitals are steady.
Dr. Sims placed the stethoscope on her chest.
Take a breath.
While she breathed, he listened, examined her wounds, pushed on her belly, and then ordered a battery of tests. Charles squeezed her hand.
Don't worry, it's just a precaution.
He left to get the supplies required to draw the blood work her doctor had ordered. Melissa turned the envelope over in her hand. She stared at it for minutes before she found the courage to open it. "My beautiful queen. Love to keep us, passion to fuel the fire, loyalty to bind us. You belong to me, yours to serve, mine to rule, your loving king." Her lungs pinched as they struggled to pull oxygen past constricted airways. The ringing in her ears escalated until it turned deafening. "He's dead. He can't hurt me. I'm free. Free to live, free to forget. He's dead. I am safe. He can't hurt me anymore." She repeated the litany until Charles returned with his needles and empty tubes. If she said the words enough times, then maybe one day they would be true. No, it was true. It was finally and unequivocally real. The Fairytale Killer had been sent to the pits of hell where he belonged. Scott couldn't touch her anymore. He couldn't hurt her ever again. As Charles prepared to take her blood, the single red rose on the table caught her attention. She glanced at the note again. Scott had asked her to call him many things in their years of marriage. She'd always been his fairytale princess, and he was her Prince Charming. Scott had never once called himself a king. A tremor worked its way up her spine, and she jumped as Charles inserted a needle into her skin.
Sorry.
He worked with brisk efficiency, collecting the required blood into his vials. A simple needle stick was nothing compared to what she'd endured at the hands of the man who'd vowed to honor, love, and protect. Charles?
Yes?
Can you check on something for me, please?
Sure thing.
I need to know about my husband.
Your hero?
Charles gave her a big grin. No, not him. My ex-husband. If he was still alive, she needed to know. And if he hadn't sent the flowers, then who had?
12. Stains. CJ. The tornadoes made national news, but CJ didn't care about the fucking tornadoes. He flipped channels trying to find a story about the prison break, but all the newscasts seemed silent on that account. Nothing about an explosion, missing inmates, or a manhunt that made its way to television, print, or internet news. How was that possible? For 3 hours, he scanned channels and surfed the net, getting nothing but a rehashing of the destruction. Frustrated, he called into work to see if Sam could help. CJ? What are you doing calling me? You're supposed to be on leave. The surprise in his boss's voice was unmistakable. Listen, I need help with something. The Guardians were hostage rescue specialists, and often contracted with the FBI, assisting with off-the-books hostage extractions. Sam had strings in high places. CJ hoped Sam could dig up something about Patterson. How'd your personal business go? That's what I wanted to talk about. It didn't. How's that possible? The execution didn't happen. A long stretch of silence passed on the other end of the line. CJ let it hang. Sam had never let him down. Sam cleared his throat. A prolonged rumble, then spoke in a firm voice. What do you need? CJ needed confirmation. You heard about the storm down here? Who hasn't? They're blasting it on national news like it's a national disaster zone. Were you near any of it? You could say. Did you see any of the twisters? News is saying that there was a bunch. 5 to be exact, but he didn't elaborate. Yeah, up close and personal. Melissa came to mind, falling in front of his car, shivering under the emergency blanket, the lace of her bra sitting over the ivory perfection of her breasts. Damn, his trousers grew tight with inappropriate thoughts about a married woman. You there? Sam's deep voice boomed. Sorry. Not like you to drift off like that. What's up? Nothing, he said. Then why'd you call? He tried to dislodge Melissa from his mind and focus on more pressing matters, but he couldn't get the brunette out of his thoughts. I need you to check on something for me. I can't get anything out of the news. The tornado hit the prison. News isn't reporting any problems, but the guards are telling a different story. One of them said there was an explosion, and the National Guard arrived to search for Patterson, but it's not being publicized. Is it him? If I can trust the words of a drunk guard, then yes. Any other prisoner, and they'd be blasting it on the news to get people to keep an eye out. But him? Scott Patterson's crimes had been beyond horrific. CJ was surprised something hadn't leaked to the press. Probably trying to cover their asses. Sam said, I think so. Which is where you come in. I need to know if the bastard got out. There were many reasons to keep quiet about the escape. None of them good. Panicking an already stressed population might be one of them. If Patterson is free, the more eyes looking for him, the better. Whoever is in charge is an idiot. Sounds like. Sam agreed. I don't know why they haven't made a statement. I could be wrong here. I'm only going on what a bunch of very tired and very drunk guards were saying, but if it was him, you know how bad that could be. Scott Patterson spent the better part of a decade on a killing spree. Each year he'd increased his kills by 3, and then he'd spent the last 3 years locked up. The man would have pent-up energy to spend. I'll look into it. Sam promised. In the meantime, what are you going to do? Because something has come up and I could use you. CJ glanced at the water stains on the ceiling. He should go back to work. Except for visiting his sister's grave, there wasn't anything keeping him here. You got a case? Yeah, it's a special one. Who were you gonna send? Your team, of course. Mac and Jenny are already on their way. By the way, Jenny did well leading Delta Team on this last case while you've been out. If you decide you want to step up, she'll be a great replacement. And what will you do? Sam was the battle commander for the 4 Guardian teams, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and CJ's team, Delta. Forrest tagged me to manage the entire operation. He's ready for me to hand over my job to my replacement. You say the word and it's yours. Forrest Summers, a billionaire on a mission to rid the world of human traffickers, recently acquired Guardian HRS. Everyone was excited by what that meant for the Guardians. Sam, moving up to manage the entire operation, left his position of battle commander open. I'm still chewing on it. He liked his position as Delta 1, lead of the Delta team. I wasn't sure if he was ready to step up to take the leadership of all 4 Guardian teams. It was a lot of responsibility, and took him a step away from the action. Was he ready to hand over Delta? It was a huge step up, more responsibility, less field work. Let me finish things out here. I'll give you my answer when I officially come back. No rush. You're the only man for the job. Not that I'm pressuring you to take it, but I don't trust anyone else to take this job. No pressure? Right. No pressure. How's our new boss? Is he shaking everything up? Is he a hands-on, in-your-face, can't-get-rid-of-him kind of boss, or is he willing to step back and let us do our job? His vision is impressive. You should see his plans for Guardian HQ. Forrest is a bit quirky, but I have to tell you, he doesn't believe in the word can't. There's nothing that man can't do, and you'll like him once you meet him. He's impressive. As far as the hands-off aspect, it's too early to tell. The man is passionate about rescuing innocents. I can say that, which brings us back to Jenny. If you have any doubts, I need to know. His skills are top-notch. I'm just not sure I want to step away from the field work. I get that, but think about it. No pressure, but I'll need an answer. If that's the case, why doesn't she take lead on this case? You don't need me. I want your eyes on this case, and I need your experience. It's right up your alley as we have shit for leads. Wonderful. Well, I say keep Jenny on point. She'll either step up or not. I'll back her up as needed and tell you if I think she's ready to lead Delta Team. If Sam wanted her to step into CJ's role as Delta 1, he needed more time to evaluate her abilities. How about assigning me to look for Patterson? If he got out, I'm tracking his ass down. If they can't figure out how to kill him, I know a good place to park a bullet. Sam's long sigh had CJ frowning. It's a kidnapping case, with no leads. The mother of 2 girls went missing yesterday afternoon. The school called the cops when the mother didn't pick up her girls from school. You know how time-sensitive cases like this are? Shit. Sam knew CJ's soft spot for kidnapping cases, but this one was fresher than what they usually worked on. How did the Guardians get involved? Guardian HRS didn't usually take cases unless they were complicated, had already failed the negotiation stage, or required unorthodox extraction techniques. Often their clients were wealthy enough to pay for the privilege. It didn't make sense why they were involved in this case. Personal favor. Widow of a war hero, 2 young girls and a lot of guardian angels who were buddies of her husband. They're afraid that with all the storm damage, no one will pay attention to her case. You know how these things go. Mac and Jenny are on their way. The rest of Delta Team will follow once they finish up the last assignment. CJ focused on the water stains. The brown spots made sockets for eyes, and a lopsided grin stared back at him where the water had dripped a little more on one side. Nothing good ever happened when kidnappers got their hands on women. You know I'm better working on Patterson's manhunt, right? Getting you on that case will take time. I'll see what I can manage, but until then, work with Jenny. I want your assessment of how Delta takes to her calling the shots. I need you on this case. Of course, he'd work the kidnapping. No way he'd turn it down, but he wasn't going to let Patterson's escape go without a fight. I'm on it. But see what you can dig up with the Justice Department about Patterson? You know I will. Sam had been the only one to notify CJ when they'd discovered his sister's body. He'd been there through the grief, and managed CJ's unhealthy obsession during the year-long trial, redirecting his pent-up energy into more useful pursuits, such as rescuing innocent victims. Oh, hell, that voice. The voice on the other end of Melissa's phone. There was a reason it sounded familiar. How could he forget the voice of the man who killed his baby sister? He suppressed a growl, but that did nothing to prevent his fist from connecting hard with the wall. Fuck, that hurt. He'd better not have broken the knuckles. Now he needed ice. Send me what information you have. Thanks, CJ. These girls have already lost one parent. Check in with me once a day. No exceptions. Got it. Sending you the files. His phone blipped with an encrypted file notification. He'd come to this town for closure. Instead, he'd found upheaval. Patterson still breathed, and CJ could do nothing about it. A gorgeous woman had fallen into and then right out of his life. Had he imagined their connection? Not like him to read a situation wrong. Shit, the air had practically sizzled between them. Now another woman needed to be saved. He palmed Melissa's phone. After his team arrived, he would return it while they briefed him. It pained him to think someone as awful as that had been a part of Melissa's life. Men like that deserved to have their balls cut off and shoved down their throats. The fact Melissa had to deal with such a man put CJ's protective instincts into overdrive. Shit. With Patterson out, she needed protection. Screw the phone. He had to get to her now. For the moment, the hospital would provide her some degree of protection. If Patterson wanted to get to her, he wouldn't approach her at the hospital. The man wasn't an idiot. With a calming breath, CJ relaxed. As long as she was there, she would be relatively safe. A quick text filled Sam in on the problem. He ached to rush to the hospital, but he had a job to do. And in kidnapping cases, hours could mean the difference between life and death. A quick type of his security code unlocked the encrypted file. This was what he did. Rescued others. No one had been around to pull him and his sister from their personal hell. He did that himself, and some stains could never be washed away. He caressed Melissa's phone, aching to rescue her. 13. Locks. Pierce. I was in a foul mood when I returned home. Things hadn't gone as planned. I had been so excited to meet my queen, but she treated me like less than nothing. She hadn't even said thank you for the flowers, and that fucking male nurse had shoved them back in my face. He and I would have words. I left the rose. The tulips had been from him, but the rose had been my gift. Not that she appreciated it. I punched a fist through the wall of my kitchen and then stared at my bloody knuckles. Bright red validation, that's what that was. Blood fascinated me. It always had. The stairs leading to the basement beckoned, whispering dark and filthy promises. I took a step toward the door, my hands fisting as I approached. The pain in my knuckles stopped me. Blood wept from the cuts, and a throbbing kept time with the beat of my heart. Down the stairs, through the cellar, past the wine rack, open the locks, and then through the tunnel to that final door. My precious princesses waited to serve my every need. But I didn't need them, not when I desired my queen. A roaring filled my head, and I cupped my ears, smearing blood alongside my left cheek. I squatted and rocked, waiting for the moment to pass. All I could think about was whipping my princesses for their queen's transgression until their tears poured more freely than their blood. This was why I'd installed the locks. They slowed me down when I got like this. My urges needed to be curbed, especially when they were dark and unpredictable, like now. Control. A prince had to be a master first of himself, even more so when he desired to be king. Bad things happened when I lost control. This lesson was one to remember. I slammed the door to the basement, silencing the beast calling me. Hit, whip, fuck, punch, kick, beat. Their torturous screams would invigorate me and satiate the lust flaring in my gut. My balls ached to spill their seed, and my cock stiffened and throbbed. Blackness filled my heart to overflowing, demanding bestial release. Sandra's destroyed face ghosted in front of me, her features framed in silent agony as her mouth formed a silent scream. The image was forever etched in my mind. I still heard her sobs in my dreams. Back then I hadn't been in control. The burning inside which called me to crush, to maim, to hurt, had not been restrained back then. I had exploded in a firestorm of sadistic lust and made my first and last mistake. Sandra had been my first, my only girlfriend, and that rage had snuffed out her light forever. This was where my thoughts spiraled, into the oblivion of past mistakes. I had to regain control before I lost myself to the depravity of my mind. I wrapped my arms around myself and rocked on the floor, banging my head against the wall until the pain grew to a level of clarity I understood. Inexperienced in what a body could endure and bursting with urges I didn't understand, I learned what happened when I didn't rein in my desires. Sandra's vacant stare was something I would never forget. An enduring lesson, and what a mess that had been. The locks kept my princesses safe from these feral cravings. A prince was foremost a master of himself, and when I couldn't control my urges, I was unfit to rule. The locks kept me out as much as it kept them in. The mistakes I'd made with Sandra forced me to learn the boundaries between pain and death. I took my princesses to the brink because I liked it, but never once did I make another mistake. I had more self-control than him. He'd been weak, whereas I was strong. God, how I wanted to fuck my princesses now. But they'd have to wait until I calmed down and got my hand stitched up. I wrapped my bloodied hand in towels, grabbed the keys to my delivery truck, and headed back to the emergency department at St. John's. His instructions had been specific. Deliver those flowers on the day of his death. But I hadn't been able to find her at her home. I had camped outside for 2 days, waiting for her to return. It was only because of my job that I stumbled upon her whereabouts at all. Stuff like that didn't happen without divine intervention, which meant fate intended us to be together. 14. Doors. CJ. A loud, persistent knocking distracted CJ from reading the files from Sam. When he didn't immediately answer, knocking turned to pounding. Pounding turned to yelling. He palmed his weapon and approached the door, only to hear a man and woman arguing on the other side.
Stop it, you'll wake the whole damn place.
Jenny's deep alto was unmistakable. What the fuck? Mac's baritone complemented the lower register of her voice. Why isn't he answering? The pounding intensified. CJ blinked lids heavy with fatigue and peered through the peephole. He rolled his eyes. Ahead of schedule. On the other side of the door, Jenny smacked Mac in the head with her purse. Mac's head tilted sideways. Jenny carried a Glock 17 in that purse. She wasn't an average woman. A tall beauty, she had a classic majesty, muscled just shy of being manly, yet she oozed a sultry seduction nearly as dark and potent as the color of her skin. Men underestimated her. It's why Sam added her to the team. CJ had been the first of the crew to step wrong with Jenny. They'd all done so, except for Mac. Something smoldered between those two, but as far as CJ knew, they weren't an item. Mac grunted, "You fucking bitch." He spun and leaped at his partner. Jenny jumped back, avoiding Mac's lunge. She placed a finger on his chest.
Don't even think about it.
Before someone from the motel called the local police on them, CJ opened the door. Can you two keep it down? Jenny sidestepped around Mac, not an easy thing, because Mac was built like a Mack truck, thus the nickname. CJ had no idea what Mac's real name was. Everyone had always called him Mac.
He wishes.
Jenny muttered as she shouldered past CJ.
Answer the fucking door next time. Seriously, you'd be dead if we wanted to kill you. Since when do you sleep that deep?
Maybe he wasn't sleeping. Anyone inside we're going to surprise? Mac's eyebrows arched. I was taking a shit and reading the files Sam sent.
Bullshit,
Jenny said.
It smells like a fucking rose in here.
Jenny plopped down on the only chair in the small motel room. CJ smirked. Jenny never took his shit. You two got here quick. Mac sat on the bed, leaving CJ to stand. He wasn't about to sit on the bed with Mac. He folded his arms across his chest and stared at his friends.
Sam told us about what happened. Are you good to go?
Jenny's look could cut steel.
I need to know if your head is in the game.
There was no compassion in Jenny's expression. Once she had a job to do, the woman got shit done. Emotions were for weaklings. A product of the slums of Rio de Janeiro, she'd lived a difficult life until a CIA agent crossed paths with her during a sting operation. She'd already killed the 5 men who'd raped her. Sam recruited her on the spot. According to Jenny, feelings got people into trouble. Mac was more of the typical hire. Ex-Delta Force, like CJ, his acquisition to the team had been a no-brainer. CJ gripped Melissa's phone until the plastic cut into his palm. I've got some business to take care of before we get started. He had a woman to save, or at least keep safe. Sam said your business was canceled. Mac leaned against the headboard and put his boots on the covers. CJ made a dismissive gesture. Patterson escaped. My business isn't done. He wiggled the phone. This belongs to his wife. Mac broke the ensuing silence with a deep indrawn breath. You know why we're here, right? Kidnapping case. Jenny's gaze cut up to the ceiling.
We don't have time to fuck around returning a damn phone.
She stood and cocked her left hip forward, a pose he'd seen too many times before. It was her do not fuck with me stance.
You're to stay out of the manhunt.
CJ turned wide eyes to Jenny. Is that what you think? She arched her brow. He shrugged. Sam's looking into it, of course, trying to get jurisdiction. But not only do I have Melissa Evans's phone, I know where she is. It's a good bet Patterson will try to make contact.
So?
Jenny crossed her arms over her chest. She's in the hospital. CJ blew out a deep breath. If Patterson goes after his wife, he'll head to her house. She needs protective custody. The roaring in CJ's ears reached deafening levels.
Meaning you?
Jenny scoffed.
I see.
No, I don't think you do. This is small-town America. They have a handful of cops. No one's going to care about her safety.
Not our job,
Jenny said.
Let me remind you that our victim has 2 little girls. Their dad is dead, and if we don't get a move on, their mom might soon be dead.
I'm not suggesting we delay anything. The police station is on the way to St. John's. We have to stop in there and meet with the local authorities. You can do that while Mac and I go to the hospital. Melissa Evans deserves protection.
Shove it up your ass, CJ,
Jenny said.
We're not doing a stopover.
I'm going to the hospital. All 3 of us don't need to be there for the meet and greet with the chief of police. That's for you as lead. Not that he had to remind her what it meant to be Delta One.
Fine.
Her breath whooshed out as she gave in.
Drop me at the precinct, run your little errand, and then we get to work.
The only reason Jenny acquiesced was because she respected him. She also depended on his recommendation.
15. Daisy. Melissa. Melissa's body protested every movement, but she didn't care. The only way out of the hospital was to move, and she needed less help every day. The nurses who'd provided her care were terrific, but she wanted to go home.
You're being discharged.
Dr. Sims boomed his announcement during his morning rounds. At 6 a.m, his jovial voice had jolted her awake and left her a grinning fool despite the early hour. Freedom. She couldn't wait to sleep in her bed and make food that had taste, texture, and didn't make her want to gag. The best part? Her favorite nurse was back on shift, and she'd get to say goodbye to Charles. Compassionate caring wasn't a quality she associated with men, but Charles had a heart of gold and healing hands.
Easy does it, Miss Evans.
Charles helped her transition from the hospital bed into the wheelchair. You can call me Melissa, you know. She took her time maneuvering her battered body. Her muscles objected, and she guarded her side, bracing against the pain.
Old habits, I guess.
He grabbed a clipboard and tucked it under his arm. I can walk, she insisted.
Hospital policy.
Charles gave her one of his easy smiles.
Everyone is discharged in a wheelchair to the curb. Now, you sure there's no one I can call?
Melissa pursed her lips and crinkled her forehead. Her so-called friends had all scurried under the woodwork after her ex-husband's arrest. She needed to stop thinking of him as a husband. He was dead, and she didn't belong to him anymore. By the time Scott had been tried and convicted, there'd been no one left she called a friend. Her parents had passed away years ago. And she'd been an only child, as had her parents. No uncles, no aunts, no cousins, no family, and no friends. There wasn't anyone to call, let alone someone to take her home. After 3 years, she hadn't found a job. No one wanted to hire a serial killer's wife. She lived off Scott's bank accounts and had years left before she'd be forced to work. In the meantime, she worked toward the marketing degree she abandoned after meeting and marrying Scott. A cab will do. She shifted in the wheelchair, giving a weary sigh. Not for the first time, she contemplated moving from this small town. It had been her home her entire life, but she'd been treated like a pariah since Scott's case broke. Moving would mean leaving her parents' gravesites behind, and honestly, she didn't have the strength to leave that part of herself behind. The pain medications messed with her head, making her feel sluggish and distanced from the world. While she'd asked Charles to find out about Scott's execution, he'd been too busy, and she felt terrible asking again. Instead, she'd flipped through the news channels, but the reporters seemed more interested in covering tornado damage than an execution. The first item on her list, call her lawyer when she got home.
Okay.
Charles made sure her feet were in the footrests of the wheelchair.
You ready?
She wore the only clothing she had, CJ's baggy sweatpants and sweatshirt. It was either his clothes or head home in a hospital gown. CJ's clothes held the lingering scent of him, a hint of musk, the tiniest waft of his laundry detergent, something woodsy and fresh, like eucalyptus leaves. Ready as I'll ever be. Melissa took a breath and blew it out slowly. It had been only a handful of days, but it already felt like a lifetime ago when CJ had rescued her from the tornado. She clutched at the fabric and breathed deeply. Strong and masculine, the scent soothed her. Her gaze landed on her lap. The harsh fluorescent lights made the diamond of her wedding ring glitter. She twisted the platinum band as she had 1,000 times before. With a tug, she tried once more to remove the ring. The damn thing wouldn't budge. Her swollen skin trapped it there, just as Scott had held her captive for so long. Charles squatted in front of her, holding a tissue. It amazed her how he always seemed to have exactly what she needed. His ability to care for others was a real gift. She reached out. Thank you. He was kind enough not to ask why she was crying. A shadow passed to the side. She turned at the unexpected movement and bit back a groan at a twinge of pain. The same delivery man who'd brought the noxious tulips held a bouquet of crimson roses sprinkled with baby's breath. His gaze locked on her as he knelt to present the arrangement with another odd flourish. Scott hated roses. Could these be from CJ? Her heart leaped with hope. Charles gave an appreciative whistle.
Now those are beautiful, not like the tulips.
The delivery man flashed Charles an irritated glare. He turned to her, fixing a smile to his face.
I told my boss you didn't like the tulips. He insisted we replace the arrangement.
That excited feeling in her belly died out. Not from CJ, then. But it was probably too much to have hoped for flowers. Who ordered the tulips? She had a million questions. Can you tell me when the order was placed? The man shrugged.
I'm sorry, I don't know. I just delivered them.
His voice held a complex timbre, smooth and hypnotic. It was bigger than his lanky frame, and magnetic in an unsettling way. She felt a need to apologize. I'm sorry you had to come back. The tulips weren't your fault. I was just feeling nauseous after surgery.
Well, flowers are supposed to cheer a person up. I chose roses. I hoped they might make you happy.
She didn't want the flowers, but he seemed kind, and she hated making him feel bad. Besides, he had gone above and beyond to replace the tulips. Thank you. They're beautiful. A look of elation filled his face, more than she would have expected from a simple thank you. Charles pointed to the bandages on the man's hands, a note of concern edging his voice.
What happened to you? A boxing injury. Comes with the territory.
The delivery man shrugged.
You don't look like a fighter.
Charles eyed him dubiously.
I give better than I get. You should see the other guy.
His swagger wasn't convincing. Melissa hid a frown. She didn't like boxing, didn't understand the need for grown men to beat on each other until they bled. I'm sorry, but I don't have money for a tip. She never carried a wallet when she ran. It had made for an interesting conversation with hospital billing, but they'd worked out payment for her hospital stay. The delivery man made a dismissive gesture.
None required. Your smile is good enough.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the flowers. He glanced left, then right.
Are you switching rooms?
I'm being discharged.
Oh, that's good news.
Thanks. Charles pushed her toward the elevator and jabbed at the down arrow while the man followed. He rode with them and then continued walking beside her through the lobby and to the curb.
You waiting on a ride?
The lanky man pulled out a set of keys from his pocket. Melissa looked up. I've got a cab coming.
Cab was supposed to be here already, Miss Evans. I apologize.
Charles's head swiveled, his gaze casting across the parking lot and the drive leading to the hospital entrance. The delivery man shook his head.
You shouldn't have to take a cab.
She shrugged, and the roses shifted in her lap, nearly tumbling to the ground. She grabbed at them and then buried her nose into the delicate petals, inhaling the light fragrance.
I could save you the price of a fare,
he offered.
Where are you headed?
Charles placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezed, and answered for her.
Thanks for delivering the flowers, but Miss Evans will take the cab.
The delivery man raised his hands.
Hey, just trying to do a good deed. It's really no problem. I don't mind.
She hesitated, unwilling to appear unappreciative, but he was a stranger.
Look.
Charles's voice deepened, taking the edge of a challenge.
She's not getting into a car with someone she doesn't know. I think she can decide for herself. Listen.
Charles's tone had gone arctic.
We're not discussing this. Probably time for you to leave.
The delivery man scowled, but after a glance at Melissa, backed down. Melissa braced herself and struggled to her feet. Someone needed to defuse the situation before it got out of hand. Charles and the delivery man locked stares. A familiar voice called out,
Melissa?
CJ jogged toward her from the direction of the parking lot. Her heart fluttered and her knees wobbled, making her sway. Charles gripped her shoulder.
I'm calling another cab.
He supported her as a wave of dizziness overcame her. The unsteadiness passed after a few seconds. Devouring the distance in long, measured strides, CJ's pace quickened. A huge man jogged behind CJ. She blinked. If she thought CJ was a large man, she'd been mistaken. The guy jogging behind him was massive. A head taller, his chest and biceps were twice as broad as CJ's. CJ stopped his easy lope just shy of the curb. He held a white daisy, pinched between his thumb and forefinger. The poor flower's roots still clung to a clod of dirt. He thrust it at her.
Here.
It's beautiful. It was more than beautiful. Daisies had always been her favorite. Their ivory petals reminded her of better days, innocent times, when she dared to dream of a future filled with smiling children, a huge family, and a warm bed with a man who protected her from the world. Her life had taken a decidedly different turn.
Are you being released?
CJ asked. She wanted him to pull her against his chest and wrap those powerful arms around her again, She wanted to inhale his rich, deep scent, not the lingering essence of him from his clothes. But CJ didn't take her into his arms. Guess I heal fast. She rushed to fill the silence.
I thought they were going to remove your spleen.
His gaze dipped to her stomach. She shook her head. It wasn't as bad as they thought. They did a
Laparoscopic surgery.
Charles finished her sentence. Yeah, what he said. The medical jargon blurred into unintelligible nonsense.
Makes sense, then.
CJ's gaze swept from one end of the curb to another, taking in the scene. His vision hitched on the delivery man standing behind the wheelchair and then moved on.
How are you getting home?
I'm waiting for my cab. His brows drew together.
No one came to visit you?
Odd question. She brought the daisy to her nose, breathing in the faint scent. Nope.
Well, shoot, I'll take you.
He dragged a hand over his close-cropped hair. Charles leaned in to whisper,
Is this him?
She gave a curt nod. Charles knew all about her disappearing hero. The huge man standing beside CJ rumbled something unintelligible. From the tone, it sounded like he had a problem with what CJ suggested.
You're the guy who saved Miss Evans. Nice to meet you.
Charles thrust his hand forward and pumped CJ's arm up and down.
Nice to meet you. Were you her doctor?
Charles laughed.
No, a common mistake.
Charles was my nurse, Melissa explained. CJ gave her a wink.
Well, thank you. She needed someone to watch over her. Yeah, that's been my experience.
Charles teased. He glanced at the tall black man.
Hello? Hello.
CJ grinned.
Sorry, Melissa, this is... Name's Mac. Nice to meet you.
She smiled at CJ's friend. Likewise. He scratched his head.
CJ and I work together.
Charles glanced at her.
You okay with him taking you home?
CJ pulled her to him. When he touched her hand, a bolt of electricity shot from his fingers up her arm. She gave a brief nod to Charles, letting him know it was okay. CJ gathered her in his arms.
Can you walk, or should I pull the car around?
The little daisy got crushed between them. I'm good. She wished her voice didn't waver. Charles and CJ both lifted a brow.
Don't push yourself too hard.
Charles touched her shoulder, an affectionate gesture goodbye. I promise I'll go slow. She lifted on tiptoe and brushed Charles's cheek with a friendly kiss. Thank you for taking such good care of me. He smiled.
My pleasure. Remember, you have an appointment in a week.
His tone sounded almost scolding, but the smile reaching his eyes told her he meant well. I promise to be a good patient. She gave Charles a final hug. Thanks for everything. Charles jockeyed the wheelchair out of the way while CJ picked up the plastic bag holding her paperwork. Charles blew an exaggerated kiss. She clutched the daisy to her chest and left the roses behind. We hope you have enjoyed this unabridged production of Rescuing Melissa, the Guardian Hostage Rescue Specialists, Book 1. Written by Ellie Masters. Narrated by Aubrey Vincent and Matt Haynes. This program was produced for JEM Publishing, LLC. Text copyright 2018 by Ellie Masters. Performance and production copyright 2021 by Ellie Masters. No part of this recording may be played for an audience or reproduced in any form and may not be streamed, downloaded, broadcast, or copied without written permission from the copyright holder.